Now, we did ask to talk to the Secretary of State for Scotland, Alistair Jack. We were told he wasn't available. Neither was the Conservative MP, Douglas Ross. But Murdo Fraser is a Conservative MSP. Hello, thank you for talking to us.
That's quite all right, John. Afternoon.
Afternoon. Has the call taken place that was meant to happen at 4 o'clock between the FM and the Prime Minister?
I'm afraid I'm not a spokesman for the UK government, so I don't know the detail of that particular call, but I do know that there have been ongoing discussions between both of Scotland's governments about this situation, and I also know that it is in everyone's interest that we proceed as far as possible on a four-nation basis, and indeed both governments have said they're committed to that general approach.
Isn't it, though, the ultimate irony that the Conservative and Unionist Party, the party of the Union, would possibly come up with a policy that was for England only for coming out of the coronavirus?
Well, the reality is that health is a devolved matter, and many of the issues we're dealing with are devolved to the Scottish Government under our current devolution settlement, and that's as it should be. But I think some people are trying to create a division here where none may in fact exist, because both governments are relying in the main on the same scientific and medical advice, and therefore are likely to come to the same conclusions about what happens next. And the indications are, notwithstanding, I think, the rather lurid headlines in some of today's newspapers, the indications coming out of the UK government today suggest that there are unlikely to be major steps taken to relax the lockdown south of the border, and the government will proceed, as you said, with maximum caution. So I think I know people think it's a great story to talk about great splits opening up between what the UK government is doing and what the Scottish government is doing. I think that's pretty unlikely to happen in practice, because if they're both taking the same advice, why would it?
Okay, well, do you know what might be proposed by Boris Johnson?
No, and I suspect, frankly, he doesn't know himself at the moment, because his announcement is not being made until 7 o'clock on Sunday evening, which is 3 days from now, and he'll be making a statement to the House of Commons next Monday, and that statement will be informed by the best scientific and medical advice and evidence available at that point. So frankly, it would be ludicrous to suggest that 3 days in advance of making that very important decision, these choices have already been made. They'll have to be guided by all the data that's available as close to the point of decision as possible.
You would agree that the UK government should share all its information with the Scottish government?
I know that there's been a lot of discussions taking place already, and I'm sure there's a huge amount of information being exchanged between the two governments, and I'm sure that's going to continue. So yes, absolutely, that flow of information will be carrying on.
Why? Can I just read you Nicola Sturgeon's spokesperson's comment after her conversation today? So this is hinting that they haven't been given all the information. I'll read you the whole quote. The First Minister reiterated to the Prime Minister that the lockdown regulations in Scotland would remain in place, and that the only issue under consideration at this time was in relation to outdoor exercise. The First Minister also made clear that the stay-at-home message remains crucial. While no specific detail of the plans under consideration by the UK government was shared, the Prime Minister confirmed that there would be further discussion ahead of a meeting of COBRA on Sunday. What's your take on that quote?
Well, my take on that is just, frankly, to reiterate the point I made to you a moment ago. We are talking about a decision being made on Sunday for an announcement to be made at 7 p.m. Sunday evening, which is more than 3 days away from the point that we are now talking. So, to suggest that decisions are being made now about an announcement to be made in 3 days' time based on very fast-moving scientific and medical advice is frankly bizarre. So I wouldn't expect I wouldn't expect a decision to be shared with the Scottish Government at this point, because I think it's extremely unlikely that any decisions have been made at this point.
Why are some of your colleagues then sharing it with the newspapers?
Well, what I think the challenge is here is that the Scottish Government and the UK Government are operating on somewhat different timescales. So the Scottish Government has made an announcement today about what's going to be happening in the next 3 weeks in terms of lockdown. The UK government is not making an announcement on the same issue for another 3 days. So we're operating slightly different timescales, and that's perhaps what's causing the confusion. But I think with both governments committed to a four-nation approach, as they say, and frankly, so far with some very limited issues of difference, Both governments have largely taken the same approach and direction based on that same scientific advice. I would be very surprised if there was a major departure between the approach that's been taken north and south of the border. Indeed, I think actually it would be very unhelpful if there was a major departure, because one of the issues that's caused some problems has been a question of mixed messaging, where people see the Scottish Government having said one thing and the UK Government having said another, and not being entirely clear where to take advice from. And now that's fortunately been very limited so far, but I think there is a real concern about the public getting different messages from different governments because people don't know then who to follow.
So you're quite clearly saying that should Boris Johnson announce something that is untenable here in Scotland, according to Nicola Sturgeon, let's say cafes reopening, that would be a very damaging thing to do.
Well, what I've said is that I think if there's different messages coming out from different parts of the UK about a response to the situation we're in, I think that will cause confusion. But any announcements that we made by either of the governments, I expect, will be based upon the best science available at that particular time. And we need to remember, John, and I chair the COVID-19 committee at Holyrood. We were taking evidence on all these issues this morning from Harry Burns, who's the former chief medical officer, and Professor Linda Bald from University of Edinburgh. This is not just about the economy. The impact on the economy is immense, and not surprisingly, many people want to see lockdown ease so people can get back to work. But this is not just an economic issue. People are dying today in the health service because so much resource and emphasis as we put on COVID-19. According to Harry Burns, there's been something like an extra 200 to 300 deaths a week in the month of March, more than we would normally expect. Referrals from GPs for cancer treatment are down 70% to hospitals. Admissions in coronary heart disease wards are well down. This is not because people have suddenly got better and healthier over the last few weeks. It's because they, as a result of lockdown, do not want to come forward with conditions that are going to end up killing them. And people are dying today because of lockdown. And we are storing up enormous health problems for the future, not least with mental health, which have a major negative health impact. So this is not just about getting the economy going again, important as that is. It's actually about saving lives of people who have conditions other than COVID-19.
And quite clearly you're saying that the UK should go about this as one, and that Boris Johnson shouldn't do anything then that would be unacceptable to Scotland. But the impact of the lockdown, according to Professor of Public Health Linda Bald, could prove worse than the virus itself.
That was the point you made to my committee this morning, yes. Exactly.
So it's really important that lockdown's lifted and the economy can move again, is it not? The Bank of England is saying that this is the worst ever recession. So this mealy-mouthed talk about lifting a lockdown and staying closed forever is relatively one-sided, because if she's saying and the Bank of England is saying this economy, this crash is worse than the virus, then people have to get back to work, don't they?
That certainly is an issue that has been considered really carefully, and Linda Ball said in her evidence this morning that she could see the case for very soon lifting some of the restrictions, for example, to allow more outdoor exercise, to allow people to get back to work with social distancing in place. But of course, it all has to be guided by the science, because there is actually a risk, of course, if we get people back to work too quickly, if we end lockdown too quickly, you get that second spike, which does overwhelm the NHS, and then you end up with a second lockdown, which actually could be more damaging than coming out of this too slowly. So, I'm not a scientist, John. I think we have to take the best advice that scientists and medical advisors can offer us and follow that. But, this is not just about saving lives with people with COVID-19. There are many people today dying of other conditions because lockdown is making it reluctant for people to come forward to the NHS, to their GPs, and seek help that they vitally need.
We're about to, thank you for your company. We're about to hear from Owen Jones, the Labour activist, about clapping for carers. If you're a Conservative MP or MSP and you clap for carers, you're a hypocrite. Will you be clapping for carers tonight?
Well, I've been out every Thursday night for the last month clapping for carers, and I imagine I'll be doing the same again tonight. And, if you look at the amount of effort...
Did you vote for their pay freezes?
I've never voted for a pay freeze for carers.
Health workers?
I don't think I've ever voted for a pay freeze for health workers either that I can remember. But I think there's a broader point. There's a broader point here, John, and that is, look, we know that the NHS is under pressure at the moment, and we know that we need to be supporting those working in NHS and vitally supporting those in the care sector as well. And that makes sure that these vital services are properly resourced. And throughout the entire period of the coalition government from 2010 onwards, the one area of public spending that was always protected was that of the NHS. And the NHS spending always increased in line with or in excess of inflation throughout that entire period. So I don't think anybody can point a figure
I'm being told to wrap up by my producer, but the problem with that is the people who are paid buttons are the ones who've been dying, the nurses, the carers, and they're the ones who are paid buttons. They're the ones who didn't get the proper PPE. They're the ones who've been dying, caring for people as they're dying. They're paid. They're not paid properly, are they?
Well, I think there's a big issue with pay in the care sector, and I quite agree. But let's remember, we are sitting here in Scotland, and these are issues devolved to the Scottish Government, and it's not the responsibility of the UK Government in Westminster to sort out the pay and conditions of those working within the NHS or within the care sector in Scotland. That's a matter for the Scottish Government.
OK, Murdo Fraser, Conservative MSP, thank you.